The alleged letter of Pontius Pilate to the Roman Emperor Tiber contains stunning revelations that go beyond what is recorded in the Gospels themselves. In this letter, Pilate describes in stunning detail Jesus' appearance, his words, his miracles, his trial, as well as the extraordinary events surrounding his crucifixion and resurrection. But what exactly does this letter relate? What were Pilate's words to the emperor about this man whom many called the Son of God? What did he say about his majestic serenity and the mystery of his resurrection? Prepare to explore a testimony that defies time and provokes deep reflections. The history of Judea at the time of Jesus is marked by intense political, religious, and cultural tension. In the 1st century, this region was under the rule of the Roman Empire, which, thanks to its military and political expansion, controlled immense territories that stretched from Europe to the Middle East. Judea constituted a particularly difficult province for Rome, with a predominantly Jewish population that resisted the impositions of foreign customs and laws. This context was the scene of constant revolts, conflicts, and negotiations between the Roman authorities and local leaders. At the center of this dynamic was Pontius Pilate, the Roman procurator of Judea from the year 26 to 36 AD. Pilate had been appointed by Tiber Caesar, the Roman emperor, to administer one of the most complex regions of the empire. His role was to ensure the order, to collect taxes, and to ensure Judea's loyalty to Rome. However, his administration was marked by a combination of firmness and strategic error, exacerbating Jewish resentment towards the Roman occupier Pilate, as the governor faced a delicate situation. On the one hand, he had to serve the interests of the empire, which demanded stability and obedience in this turbulent province. The Jewish culture, deeply anchored in its religious traditions, rejected any form of idolatry, including images of the emperor that the Romans exposed. This resistance to culture often put Pilate in direct conflict with the local authorities. A notable example of this clumsiness was the order given to install standards with images of Caesar. In Jerusalem, this act, considered a sacrilege by the Jews, provoked massive protests and deteriorated his relations with the population. Pilate is often described as a pragmatic leader, but who at times underestimated the religious sensitivity of the people, which generated unnecessary tensions in this turbulent context that emerged. Letter from Pontius Pilate to Emperor Tiber that relates the events linked to Jesus of Nazareth. Although the authenticity of this letter is debated, its content is fascinating and offers a unique perspective on the figure of Jesus and the circumstances of his crucifixion. In his letter, Pilate portrays Jesus as a remarkable personality endowed with a presence and wisdom that distinguished him from others. He relates the miracles attributed to Jesus, such as healings and even the resurrection of the dead, and describes the events that led to his arrest and trial. The historical significance of this letter goes beyond the simple account of the facts. It is often cited as a testimony of the way in which Jesus was perceived by a Roman representative of the time. Pilate writes there with a tone that mixes admiration and concern, suggesting that the events surrounding Jesus had the potential to change the destiny of nations. This phrase mentioned in the letter still resonates today, testifying to the extent of the impact that these events had on the world. Throughout history, the letter also reveals the dilemma that Pontius Pilate faced in the face of pressure from Jewish religious leaders and the crowd. He was aware that any decision he made regarding Jesus could lead to politicians and religious leaders. The mention of Jesus as a figure who attracted friends and enemies illustrates well the polarization caused by his message and his actions. Finally, Pilate's story highlights the uniqueness of the events that occurred in Judea during his term in office. With an almost prophetic tone, he expresses that what he observed was not banal, but extraordinary, as if destiny and divine providence were at work. It is this perception that makes this testimony, whether authentic or symbolic, a precious resource for understanding the relationship between Rome and the Jewish authorities. And the movement started by Jesus. If you like this type of content, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and tell us in the comments which city you are watching this video from. And let's continue the story. Was Pontius Pilate's first contact with Jesus not direct, but transmitted by the rumors that circulated among the religious leaders and the population of Judea? As Pilate, having recently arrived in this turbulent province, understood the social and religious movements God was essential to maintain control among the many reports of insurrection by leaders and messianic figures. The name of Jesus of Nazareth began to stand out. Some described him as a prophet, others as an agitator, and many as a teacher who attracted large crowds. Pilate, initially skeptical, began to pay attention to this man, whose words called into question both religious traditions and the established order. The first time Pilate heard of Jesus was through his informants who reported the activities of this man. Originally from Nazareth in the regions of Galilee and Judea, Jesus was described as a charismatic preacher capable of gathering large crowds. Although Pilate remained constantly on the alert for possible rebel leaders, he quickly realized that Jesus seemed different from the usual agitators who incited the population to revolt against Rome. Jesus did not seem interested in political or military confrontations. His teachings focused on spiritual and ethical issues, often criticizing the hypocrisy and corruption of religious leaders. Pilate decided to investigate Jesus further after an intriguing story. One day, while walking through the city, he noticed a large crowd gathered around a man who was speaking quietly, leaning against a tree, although he did not come any closer. Pilate was intrigued by the attention this man seemed to attract, so in order not to draw attention to himself, he sent his secretary Manius to mingle with the crowd and listen to the words of Jesus. Manius, a man in whom Pilate had complete confidence, was fluent in both Hebrew and Greek, which allowed him to easily understand the discourse and the cultural context of the messages transmitted by Jesus. When Manius returned to the priesthood, he brought an impressive report describing the words of Jesus as being totally different from anything he had heard previously, even in the works of the great Greek philosophers. One of the most striking episodes was when a man in the crowd asked Jesus what he thought about paying taxes in Rome, a delicate issue for both the Romans and the Jews. Jesus' answer was clear and wise: "Give to Caesar what is Caesar's, and to God what is God's." This phrase, reported by Manius, left a strong impression on Pilate. He understood that although Jesus' words could be perceived as a questioning of religious authority, they did not represent a direct threat to Roman power. On the contrary, Jesus seemed to advocate a separation between spiritual matters and civil obligations, an approach that to Pilate was both surprising and in some ways convenient. From this testimony, Pilate began to form his own idea of Jesus. He saw him as a wise man whose presence and words could defuse conflicts and avoid issues that could cause political tensions. For Pilate, Jesus was not like the other agitators with whom these men were often confronted, who preached revolt against Rome and sought to manipulate the masses for purposes of political or religious power. Jesus, on the contrary, seemed indifferent to political disputes, focused on spiritual and ethical issues. It is in this context that the letter attributed to Pontius Pilate appears, addressed to the Emperor Tiber, which offers a fascinating account of different aspects linked to Jesus, highlighting his personality, his teachings, his miracles, his trial, and the extraordinary events that surrounded his crucifixion. Here is an excerpt from this letter. "Your Majesty, allow me to tell you about it. Man named Jesus of Nazareth, whose conduct impressed me deeply. He is a man of impeccable character whose wisdom and words surpass anything I have read in the writings of Socrates, Plato, or any other renowned philosopher. He speaks with a calm authority and at the same time a simplicity that captivates the heart of those who hear him. These words are not just theoretical or abstract, but practical, imbued with a spiritual weight that seems to touch directly the soul. I remember an episode related by my men when one of his opponents who sought to challenge him asked a question about paying the tribes to the emperor. Jesus, without hesitation, answered with disarming clarity, "Give to Caesar what is Caesar's, and to God what is God." This answer not only calmed the crowd but also revealed his ability to deal with complex issues with a wisdom that seemed to come from another world. He does not seek personal glory or exaltation, but conveys a message that reasons in a unique way with rich and poor, Jews and Romans, and even among those who wish to see him fail. Without a doubt, he is unlike any man I have ever known or who I have heard of. This first impression was essential in determining Pilate's attitude toward Jesus, as the religious leaders often accused him of being a threat. Pilate saw no real danger to Rome in Jesus in his eyes. Jesus was a unique man whose wisdom went beyond common understanding, but who at the same time did not present the characteristics of a unique man. whether a rebel or a conspirator. This perception, however, put Pilate in an uncomfortable position. On the one hand, he recognized the importance of maintaining peace in the region and meeting the demands of local leaders. On the other hand, he felt that intervening directly in matters concerning Jesus would be an injustice. Over time, Pilate continued to receive reports about Jesus, some extolling his miracles, while others denounced his audacity in defying Jewish traditions and customs, each new report reinforcing the image of Jesus as an extraordinary figure. But difficult to categorize, Pilate knew he had to act cautiously because dealing with the situation of Jesus was not only a political issue but also a balancing act between the forces that shaped Judea, Roman authority, the interests of religious leaders, and the expectations of the people. In the letter attributed to Pontius Pilate addressed to the Emperor Tiber, Jesus is described as follows: "Your Majesty, I have heard of a young man named Jesus of Nazareth, whose figure and conduct cause great excitement in my province. He is described as a man of medium height with a serene appearance that attracts attention without effort. His hair is long, slightly wavy in a tone that reflects a light brown, almost golden tone harmoniously on his shoulders. His eyes of remarkable intensity oscillate between light brown and blue. Depending on the light, there is something extraordinary in his gaze, a mixture of compassion and an unusual firmness, as if he could probe the depths of the soul of whoever sees him. His skin is fair, but with a healthy glow like that of someone who spends a lot of time outdoors. He wears a well-groomed beard that gives him dignity and a natural respect. Accentuating the symmetry of his features, there is in his expression a calm that disarms even in the most tense moments. His clothes are simple, a tunic and a coat without adornments, always clean, reflecting a humility that seems deliberate. Nothing in his appearance reminds of pride or the search for material power. His presence, majesty, is at the same time imposing and welcoming, as if he embodied the majesty of a king and the humility of a servant. There is something about him that defies any earthly description. His appearance and his behavior captivate those who know him, even those who initially look at him with skepticism or hostility. This physical description stands out for going beyond external appearance. The letter highlights the impression that Jesus left on those who met him, as if he possessed the ability reading and understanding souls. With a simple glance, the phrase, he seemed to convey compassion and wisdom. With just his gaze reflects this almost supernatural quality of his presence. It was not only the beauty of his features that attracted attention, but the depth of his expression, as if he carried within himself the answer to the most intimate questions of the human soul. Throughout history, cultural and artistic representations of Jesus have been profoundly influenced by similar descriptions in Renaissance art. For example, Jesus is often portrayed with long, fair hair, a serene face, and eyes full of compassion, characteristics that seem to reason with this description attributed to Pilate. However, representations of Jesus have varied over the centuries, reflecting cultures and circumstances. Artists in Europe, he was often presented as a man with fair skin and delicate features, while in other regions of the world his representation integrated the ethnic and cultural characteristics of the local populations. The description offered in this letter, however, goes beyond artistic and cultural conventions by portraying Jesus as a figure whose appearance not only impressed but also communicated. His presence is portrayed as imposing but never threatening, a combination of humility and majesty. Difficult to fully comprehend the story of his light skin marked by the healthy glow of a life lived in the capital. Reflects a simple but active existence. The full and carefully cared for beard that adorned his face added a touch of maturity and respect, completing this image of a being who seemed at the same time deeply human and mysteriously divine. The simplicity of these clothes is also mentioned, emphasizing his connection with material values. He wore a long tunic and a coat, both clean but modest, without ornaments or signs of ostentation. This choice reinforced the message he conveyed through his words, and his actions are a call to humility, purity of heart, and detachment from earthly riches. Therefore, the description of his physical appearance is not only a portrait of his person but also a reflection of his essence and his values. Comparing this description with subsequent cultural representations, we see how profoundly it influenced the image we have of Jesus. Although cultural variations are inevitable, what remains constant is the effort to capture the serenity, wisdom, and compassion that shine through in his expression. Pilate's letter, therefore, offers not only a glimpse into Jesus' appearance, but also a window into understanding the impact he had on those who knew him, including an initially suspicious Roman governor. The detailed description is above all a testimony to the way in which Jesus was seen, not only as a man, but as someone who transcended the usual categories of human judgment. His appearance, as described in this letter, was an extension of his Lady-like personality and his message. The relationship between Jesus and Pontius Pilate was marked by a strange balance between tolerance and tension. When Jesus began to gain notoriety in Judea, Pilate did not consider him a direct threat to the Roman order. In the eyes of the governor, Jesus did not fit the profile of the agitators who often appeared preaching rebellion against Rome or seeking to incite the population to revolt. Accentuating the symmetry of his features there is in his expression a calm that disarms even in the most tense moments. His clothes are simple, a tunic and a coat without adornments, always clean, reflecting a humility that seems deliberate. Nothing in his appearance reminds of pride or the search for material power. His presence, majesty, is at the same time imposing and welcoming. As if he embodied the majesty of a king and the humility of a servant, there is something about him that defies any earthly description. His appearance and his behavior captivate those who know him, even those who initially look at him with skepticism or hostility. This physical description stands out for going beyond external appearance. The letter highlights the impression that Jesus left on those who met him, as if he possessed the ability reading and understanding souls with a simple glance. The phrase "he seemed to convey compassion and wisdom with just his gaze" reflects this almost supernatural quality of his presence. It was not only the beauty of his features that attracted attention, but the depth of his expression, as if he carried within himself the answer to the most intimate questions of the human soul. Throughout history, cultural and artistic representations of Jesus have been profoundly influenced by similar descriptions in Renaissance art. For example, Jesus is often portrayed with long, fair hair, a serene face, and eyes full of compassion, characteristics that seem to reason with this description attributed to Pilate. However, representations of Jesus have varied over the centuries, reflecting cultures and circumstances. Artists in Europe, he was often presented as a man with fair skin and delicate features, while in other regions of the world his representation integrated the ethnic and cultural characteristics of the local populations. The description offered in this letter, however, goes beyond artistic and cultural conventions by portraying Jesus as a figure whose appearance not only impressed but also communicated. His presence is portrayed as imposing but never threatening, a combination of humility and majesty. Difficult to fully comprehend the story of his light skin marked by the healthy glow of a life lived in the capital reflects a simple but active existence. The full and carefully cared for beard that adorned his face added a touch of maturity and respect, completing this image of a being who seemed at the same time deeply human and mysteriously divine. The simplicity of these clothes is also mentioned, emphasizing his connection with material values. He wore a long tunic and a coat, both clean but modest, without ornaments or signs of ostentation. This choice reinforced the message he conveyed through his words, and his actions are a call to humility, purity of heart, and detachment from earthly riches. Therefore, the description of his physical appearance is not only a portrait of his person but also a reflection of his essence and his values. Comparing this description with subsequent cultural representations, we see how profoundly it influenced the image we have of Jesus. Although cultural variations are inevitable, what remains constant is the effort to capture the serenity, wisdom, and compassion that shine through in his expression. Pilate's letter, therefore, offers not only a glimpse into Jesus' appearance, but also a window into understanding the impact he had on those who knew him, including an initially suspicious Roman governor. The detailed description is above all a testimony to the way in which Jesus was seen, not only as a man, but as someone who transcended the usual categories of human judgment. His appearance, as described in this letter, was an extension of his Lady-like personality and his message. The relationship between Jesus and Pontius Pilate was marked by a strange balance between tolerance and tension. When Jesus began to gain notoriety in Judea, Pilate did not consider him a direct threat to the Roman order. In the eyes of the governor, Jesus did not fit the profile of the agitators who often appeared preaching rebellion against Rome or seeking to incite the population to revolt. On the contrary, these words seemed imbued with wisdom and spirituality, carrying a message that went beyond earthly politics. That is why Pilate made the decision not to intervene in Jesus' activities, granting him unusual freedom for a man who attracted so much attention that this initial attitude of Pilate provoked reactions. Strong among both the Romans and the Jewish religious leaders, the latter, in particular the Pharisees and Sadducees, considered Jesus a threat to their authority and the order they had established in collaboration with Rome. For them, Pilate's tolerance of Jesus was a sign of weakness or worse, of complicity. Accustomed to manipulating Roman power to their advantage, their religious leaders exerted constant pressure on Pilate, presenting accusations against Jesus and claiming that his preaching risked destabilizing the province. Although Pilate seemed to perceive something different in Jesus, he did not see him as a threat of the same kind as other religious or political leaders. On the contrary, there was something in Jesus that intrigued Pilate, encouraging him to hesitate before taking severe measures against him. This initial freedom granted by Pilate to Jesus had important consequences. On the one hand, it allowed Jesus to continue his mission, attracting a growing number of disciples and amplifying the impact of his message. On the other hand, it placed Pilate in a delicate position, since Jesus' popularity increased and criticism of his tolerance multiplied. Jewish religious people interpreted Pilate's attitude as a weakening of his authority as the population divided between those who followed justice and those who rejected it became increasingly difficult to control. This situation accentuated the instability in Judea, a province already naturally prone to tensions and revolts. The relationship between Pilate and Jesus, although limited, seems to have left a deep impression on the governor when Pilate finally had the opportunity to meet Jesus in person. He was filled with a mixture of curiosity and concern. He recognized in Jesus a serenity and a strength that transcended earthly realities during the interrogation. Pilate was impressed by Jesus' calm and firmness in the face of accusations and threats. Jesus' words were imbued with a wisdom that Pilate compared to that of Socrates or Plato. They seemed to disarm any argument or justification for condemning him. This led Pilate to reflect on the nature of power and justice, concepts that he had previously viewed only from a political perspective. This brief interaction seems to have shaken Pilate's worldview as a governor. He was accustomed to navigating the complexities of politics and social control, but Jesus introduced into his life a perspective that went far beyond his earthly concerns. The idea of a kingdom that is not of this world directly challenged the conception of power that Pilate knew and exercised. He saw himself as the representative of Caesar, the most powerful man on earth, but he now found himself face to face with a man whose authority did not seem to rest on armies or decrees, but on something much deeper and unattainable. Pontius Pilate's letter to Emperor Tiber mentions aspects that suggest that this interaction with Jesus and the way Pilate I saw him here is an excerpt where this encounter is reported. Your Majesty, allow me to tell you about the day I met Jesus of Nazareth. When he was taken to the priesthood to be judged, I confess to having felt something that I had never experienced during my life as governor. Seeing him before he even uttered a word, I felt as if my feet were nailed to the ground, unable to move. He advanced with a supernatural serenity, as if he carried within himself a force that disarmed all those who confronted him. His presence was at the same time heavy and luminous, a light that penetrated the depths of my soul. When I questioned him, he answered with a calmness that disconcerted me. I asked him if you are the King of the Jews, and he answered that you are the one who said that. There was no arrogance in these words, but there was also no submission. It was as if he placed himself above the accusations made against him. He speaks of a kingdom that is not of this world. Words that left me perplexed and led me to question everything I thought I knew about power and authority. Your Majesty, I assure you that at that moment, it was not I who judged this man. It was as if I was judged by his simple presence, by his unshakable calm for a truth that seemed to transcend any defense or discussion. Even when the crowd demanded his crucifixion, he remained impassive, as if he already knew the result of his journey. Never before or since have I met anyone like him, and I tell you that this encounter left an indelible mark on my soul. In the face of the crowd's CR and the insistence of the religious leaders, Pilate found himself faced with a moral and political dilemma. A revolt in Jerusalem risked compromising his position as governor, and in order to attract Caesar's wrath, especially in a province already marked by constant tensions. Pilate then made a decision that would forever mark his history. He gave in to the pressure, but in a symbolic gesture to try to show his innocence, he brought a basin of water and in front of the crowd, he washed his hands, declaring that I am innocent of the blood of this only concerns him. Matthew 27 verse 20, for the gesture of washing his hands was powerful, but also controversial. It symbolized Pilate's attempt to morally dissociate himself from the decision to transfer responsibility to the religious leader and the crowd that demanded the crucifixion. However, history did not absolve him. Despite his declaration of innocence, he remained the representative of Roman power and, as such, assumed ultimate responsibility for the condemnation of this gesture, although the symbolic was not enough to erase the guilt he felt after the sentence. Jesus, he was handed over to the Roman soldiers to be flogged, a common practice before crucifixion. He was humiliated by wearing a purple robe and crowned with a cruel parody of his supposed royalty. Even at that moment, Pilate seemed to hesitate, hoping that the brutality of the punishment would be enough to pacify the crowd. But the cries of crucify him, continued to rise, resounding louder and louder within the walls of the priesthood. The letter attributed to Pilate thus describes the end of the condemnation. I tried to free him because I knew he was innocent, but I was pressured by the Jewish leaders and the crowd they had manipulated. I proposed the tradition of freeing a prisoner during Passover by presenting Jesus alongside Barabbas, a notorious criminal. To my astonishment and horror, the crowd demanded the release of Barabbas and demanded the crucifixion of Jesus. I appealed to their reason, but their cries only grew louder, seeing that nothing could appease their fury. I washed my hands in front of them and declared that I am innocent of the blood of this man. But what worries you? Despite my words, Your Majesty, I know that this decision will last forever. Mark my soul. I handed Jesus over to the soldiers so that he could be crucified, but the weight of his condemnation has never left me. The crucifixion of Jesus remains one of the most significant events in history, not only for the brutality and injustice of the act, but also for the supernatural phenomena that accompanied it. These events left witnesses, and even authorities such as Pontius Pilate impressed and perplexed. The account attributed to Pilate of the events of that day describes an atmosphere charged with tension, of fear, and inexplicable phenomena that seemed to extend beyond the earthly realm, suggesting that a divine event was underway when Jesus was taken to Golgotha, the place of the skull to be crucified. The atmosphere in Jerusalem was already charged with emotion and conflict, a Roman method of execution designed to inflict prolonged suffering, and the public humiliation occurred while a crowd composed of mockers and Jesus' most faithful disciples. Pilate, although reluctant to authorize the execution, observed from afar the unfolding of the events deeply marked by his encounter with Jesus, described the beginning of the crucifixion as a strange silence, a calm in the face of the events that was to shake not only the city, but also the entire universe. According to the stories, around noon while Jesus was hanging on the cross, a supernatural darkness enveloped the entire region. This darkness was not natural nor caused by an eclipse, because Easter happens during the full moon, making such a phenomenon impossible. Pilate himself would have been disturbed by this darkness, feeling that something was wrong, as if the heavens were rising against the actions of men. This detail agrees perfectly with the scriptures in Matthew 27 verse 45. From the 6th to the 9th hour there was darkness over the whole land for many. This darkness symbolized divine mourning, a heavenly sadness in the face of the imminent death of the Son of God. In the letter attributed to Pilate, this event is described as follows: Your Majesty, allow me to relate the events that occurred during the execution of Jesus of Nazareth, phenomena that I had never seen in my entire life. At noon, while he was hanging on the cross, an inexplicable darkness covered the entire area. It was not a shadow like that caused by an eclipse or a storm, but rather a dense and supernatural darkness that seemed to weigh down the entire land. Those present murmured in fear because they had never seen anything like it. Myself on my rack, I felt a cold shiver, as if the sky was in mourning for the event that was to come. Then at the moment he bowed his head and gave up the ghost. The earth began to shake violently. The rocks split and crumbled down the slopes. The temple in Jerusalem was affected in an inexplicable way. I have heard reports that the veil of the temple that separates the holy place from the Holy of Holies was torn from top to bottom, a sign that many interpreted as an omen. The crowd that had previously demanded his crucifixion seemed then overcome with respect, mixed with fear. Some fell to their knees. Others fled in terror. Another impressive event was the earthquake that occurred at the moment Jesus gave up his spirit. In his observations, Pilate described the earth shaking with such intensity that he seemed to hear a scream coming from the man. Creation itself protesting the injustice inflicted on this man. The earthquake was so violent that it split rocks and opened tombs. This phenomenon is also reported in Matthew 27 verses 51 to 52. And behold, the veil of the temple was torn in two from top to bottom. The earth shook. The rocks split and the tombs opened. The veil of the temple that separated the sacred place from the sacred design, tearing from top to bottom, carried a profound symbolism that marked the end of the separation between God and men, symbolizing direct access to the divine presence made possible by Jesus' sacrifice. These supernatural events terrified not only the crowd but also the Roman soldiers. Pilate mentions in his story that even his own men, hardened by years of combat and execution, were struck with fear at his manifestations. A centurion probably responsible for overseeing the crucifixion would have truthfully declared that this man was the Son of God. Matthew 27:54. This statement comes from a pagan Roman soldier, was a powerful testimony that reflected the universal impact of Jesus' death, affecting even those who did not belong to the Jewish people. Pilate would also have mentioned that the signs in heaven and on earth caused many to reconsider their enraged actions at his call. As the blood began to disperse in the silence invaded by a feeling of regret and guilt, some fell to their knees crying or murmuring prayers. The combination of the darkness of the earthquake and the torn veil of the temple was not a simple coincidence, but seemed like an orchestration of events that for many confirmed the divinity of Jesus, and the gravity of the error committed. These phenomena also left Pilate deeply disturbed, although he tried to wash his hands of this responsibility. The events that followed the crucifixion constantly reminded him, he told him that he had participated in something much greater than a simple administrative decision. In his later reflections, Pilate described this day as the most moving of his life, an event that transcended political and religious issues. He felt he had witnessed a divine drama, a moment in which heaven and earth met to witness the death of this exceptional man. A few days after the crucifixion, the tomb of Jesus was discovered, which had been sealed and kept under strict surveillance. Empty. In the letter attributed to Pilate, this event is reported as follows: Your Majesty, a few days after the execution of Jesus of Nazareth, extraordinary events began to be reported in my province. The tomb where his body was laid, sealed with a stone and guarded by Roman soldiers, was found empty at dawn on the third day. The terrified guards came to my priesthood with a story that I will never forget. They told me that during the last watch of the night, a celestial light brighter than the sun illuminated the entire place. In the midst of this light, they heard what seemed to be celestial fields, and the earth began to shake violently. The soldiers described that the stone that sealed the tomb was moved not by human hands, but by a force that they could not explain. They fell to the ground as if they were dead, unable to move because the light was so intense, and fear paralyzed them when they regained their senses. The body of Jesus was no longer there. They swore majestically that there had been no human intervention. They reported having seen something or someone of heavenly appearance, but were too frightened to fully understand what had happened. The religious leaders, upon learning of this, rushed to bribe the soldiers, asking them to spread the version according to which Jesus' disciples stole his body while he slept. However, Your Majesty, these stories cannot be suppressed. The disciples of Jesus now openly proclaim that he is risen, as he had predicted. They claim to have seen him speak to him, and even touch his hands and feet where the marks of his nails are still visible. I must confess that these events disturb my soul. I cannot help but think that I participated in something much greater than a simple trial or an execution if these stories are true, and every day new testimonies seem to confirm them. But then this man we crucified was not like the others. Your Majesty, the idea that he really did rise again, and that his message continues to spread among all nations is not only possible, but seems inevitable. A few days later, as Pilate indicates in his account, Jesus' disciples began to proclaim that he had risen. This statement was first met with skepticism by many, but quickly gained strength. The disciples claimed to have seen Jesus alive. They spoke with him and even touched his hands and feet where the nail marks were still visible. The message of the resurrection began to spread not only among the Jews but also among the Romans, giving rise to a movement that challenged both the religious authorities and the power of Rome. Pilate concludes the letter attributed to him with the following words: Majesty, I have heard of a young man named Jesus of Nazareth, whose figure and manner cause great commotion in my province. He is described as a man of medium height with a serene appearance that effortlessly attracts attention. His hair is long, slightly wavy, and a tone that reflects a light brown, almost golden, falling harmoniously over his shoulders. His eyes have a remarkable intensity between light brown and blue, depending on the light. There is something extraordinary in his gaze, a mixture of wisdom, compassion, and an unusual firmness, as if he could probe the depths of the soul of whoever looks at him. His skin is light, marked with a healthy tone like that of someone who spends a lot of time outdoors. He wears a well-groomed beard, which gives him a dignity and a natural respect, accentuating the symmetry of his features. There is a calm in his expression that disarms even in the most tense moments. His clothes are simple, a tunic and an unadorned coat, always clean, reflecting a humility that seems deliberate. Nothing in his appearance suggests pride. He seeks material power. His presence is majestic and at the same time welcoming, as if he embodied the majesty of a king and the humility of a servant. There is something that defies any earthly description. His appearance and behavior captivate those who know him, even those who initially view him with skepticism or hostility. Attributed to Pontius Pilate, addressed to the Emperor Tiber, is a fascinating document that, although widely considered apocryphal, continues to exert a powerful attraction on researchers and readers. Its importance goes beyond the question of historical authenticity. It stands as a reflection of the impact of Jesus of Nazareth on the minds and hearts of later generations. The letter presents us with an introspective Pilate torn between his political duty and the spiritual implications of the events he witnessed. It invites a deep reflection on the figure of Jesus and the meaning of his life, his death, and his resurrection. As an apocryphal text, the letter cannot be considered a reliable historical source, but this does not in any way diminish its literary and theological value. It offers us a glimpse of the dilemma that Pilate might have faced, powerfully capturing the tension between the earthly power of Rome and the spiritual authority of Jesus. More than a story, this letter functions as a mirror of the search for a human face to inexplicable events. By describing Jesus with terms imbued with reverence and mystery, the letter broadens our understanding of his uniqueness, highlighting aspects that resonate with the biblical stories while at the same time offering a humanizing perspective of the figure of Pilate. True or not, the supposed letter of Pontius Pilate to the Emperor Tiber offers us much more than the story of an extraordinary event. It is an invitation to reflect on the choices we make, the values we defend, and the invisible forces that shape them. In shaping our history, Pilate, although in a position of authority, finds himself confronted with dilemmas that resonate deeply with our own internal struggles: how to act justly, how to resist the pressures of the world around us, and how to understand our role in something greater than ourselves. The central message that this letter conveys to us is that truth and justice, although often demanding, are intransigent. Pilate's hesitation in his attempt to wash his hands of all responsibility reminds us that our actions or our omissions have consequences that go beyond us. It reminds us that every decision carries with it the potential to transform lives and destinies, and that regrets are often missed opportunities to do what is right. On the other hand, it also invites us to see beyond the present moment, to contemplate the lasting impact of messages and events that at first glance may seem insignificant. The story of Jesus, even through the eyes of Pilate, transcends politics and power, pointing to a universal truth: the power of love, compassion, and faith is greater than any empire or human system. As a final lesson, this letter invites us to examine our own lives and choices with a renewed sense of responsibility and purpose. That we can learn from Pilate's doubt, but also from Jesus' courage in facing our challenges with serenity and remaining faithful to what is true. After all, each of us leaves a mark on the world, and it is up to us to decide whether that mark will be that of justice, compassion, and light. This reflection inspires us to act with wisdom and integrity, recognizing that, as in Pilate's time, our choices today will shape the future. Thank you for your attention. See you soon, and may God be with you.